All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Bruno. I am the Assistant Director of Graduate Career Services here at the Marxe School. I'm joined with my colleague, Suzanne Grossman, Deputy Director. And today we're really excited to bring you an alumni career chat where we focus on one alum's career trajectory and professional development and their reflections on the Marxe School. And today we are joined with Maryam Mohammed-Miller, who is an MPA graduate, and might I also mention a virtual MPA graduate too. So we're very excited to have her. She is currently the Director of Government Relations of Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. We are very excited to have her, and thank you all for submitting such wonderful questions. So the way that this program today is structured is that we'll start off with a panel with some preset questions based on some of the comments that have been submitted in the RSVP. Towards the end, we'll open it up for Q&A for all of you to get to ask Maryam questions directly. If you have any questions in the meantime and want to put them in the chat, feel free to do so. You just get the thought out of your head, completely fine, and then we'll address it at the latter end. So welcome, Maryam. We're so excited to have you. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me. I'm really excited to jump into this conversation, speak to some of my colleagues at Marxe, speak about my experience there. I'm really happy to be here in community with folks and answer questions. So thank you for having me again.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll just start. Could you just introduce, as a broad way to introduce yourself, could you just introduce your current position, how you got to your current position, and yeah, I'll leave it at there for now.
Sure. Again, my name is Maryam Mohammed-Miller. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Government Relations Director at Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. My affiliate covers 65% of the state, one of 5 Planned Parenthood affiliates throughout New York. And my primary function on the government relations team is working with elected officials, government agencies, coalition partners to advance legislation that safeguards reproductive health care access in our state, working with national partners to do the same throughout the country, working on intersectional issues in addition to reproductive health, issues around immigration rights, issues for the LGBTQ plus community, young people, housing, transportation, really all things that sometimes serve as impediments to healthcare access for folks. So yeah, really exciting work, really busy work, given the national, landscape of reproductive healthcare access right now. But work that I'm really passionate about. I think the second part was like, how did I get here?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I really high level kind of started working in organizing capacity throughout New York City, doing organizing work with a number of immigrant rights organizations. I come from a family of immigrants. My parents are from Nigeria and Ghana. So really out of necessity, just working to advance rights for immigrants throughout our city. Doing that work led me into an opportunity working for the New York State Senate, doing community affairs and policy work. I also worked for the U.S. House of Representatives, similarly doing some community and policy work. During that time, had a really strong passion grow within me for advocacy around healthcare rights, specifically for Black women. And that's how I kind of landed at Planned Parenthood, which was Planned Parenthood of New York City at the time. So I landed there doing, similar work that I'm doing now in government relations. And, the organization merged with other Planned Parenthood affiliates. And now my work has expanded statewide. So always had a passion for advocacy for marginalized communities, kind of fine-tune that throughout my experiences. And now I'm working on policy, government relations work on a really important issue that really impacts a lot of folks throughout the city. So yeah, that's like a really high level overview of the last like 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful to hear. And I'm very, I actually didn't know that it had expanded from like very local to very high level. So I'm very thank you for providing that overview. Um, just quickly, how did you find yourself in the MPA program? What was your concentration, and how did you go about deciding that concentration?
Sure. So the Marxe School was the only MPA program I applied to. I was really intentional about coming to Baruch for my master's program. One, I just think a number of folks that I, looked up to, were mentored by, went through the program. And so I had, friends, colleagues, mentors again, that I knew went through the program, have been using the skills, and was able to connect to a really great alumni network. Now Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson also went through the program, so that was like one thing I was like, oh, this is like I think the fit for me. Just like professionally working in city and state government, there are a number of folks who hold positions in that area, so it was also kind of an opportunity to rub shoulders with folks that I would like have to lobby. So yeah, I think in addition to the network, just hearing folks talk about their experience with the curriculum, the professors, some of the opportunities to work with other master's programs at the school. It just felt like a natural fit. And so it was the only program I applied to, and thankfully I got in. But I concentrated on it's escaping me, but like nonprofit management. I was working at a nonprofit. I was at Planned Parenthood at the time. So it was also a natural fit to, learn a little bit more about theory around public administration as it relates to nonprofit and growing organizations, learning about how they function, again, on a theory level, figuring out how to apply that to the work that I was doing. So yeah, it was all kind of like intentional in terms of picking the program and the concentration.
Yeah. I was also like you. I very much only applied to Marx, and I was like, yes, like I very much relate to that intentionality. And you bring up a great point of being connected to such a great network, and to the Marx community, which leads to my first question. Within the Marx community, we are very passionate about public issues, and a buzzword I would say among us is that we all want to advocate for something. We all are pushing for advocacy. So my first questions are, one, what does advocacy mean to you? And then the second part to that is, how do you recommend people to start advocating for issues in a way that leads them towards a career path?
Sure. So for me, advocacy means using, my tools, my knowledge, my skills as an individual to contribute to a broader movement that addresses an issue impacting like communities that I'm really passionate about. That's like really high level, but I think in terms of how I operationalize that in my work, you know, one, learning from the communities that I hope to make change in, being really intentional about being in community spaces, listening in, learning as much as possible from folks who are having, these experiences. And so for me, that's like, going to community events, going to community board meetings, going to tenant association meetings, really granular spaces where folks are organizing. To listen and learn, and kind of translating what I'm learning into strategy and action items that is like in partnership with folks. And so really figuring out ways to bring folks along in the advocacy work that I do. And what that looks like, for example, is a big part of my work is around like birth equity, which is, a part of the reproductive rights conversation. So oftentimes I partner with, Black birth justice organizations throughout the city, listening and learning again, figuring out and developing strategy with them on, policy items, figuring out funding for issues that are important to them, figuring out how we can like kind of maneuver resources from Planned Parenthood into their organizations, really giving back, and really creating a platform for these organizations leading this work to kind of um, talk about the issues that are important to them and lead the conversations around it. So I guess in short, just empowering the communities that are impacted by the issues that I'm passionate about to advocate for themselves. That's advocacy, right? And the second part of that question was, it's escaping me.
Yeah. So I guess what are some action steps that,
Okay.
in terms of like wanting to take that advocacy, what are some like action steps that kind of helped you do that to turn it towards more of a career? We all, I think we started it as like a personal passionate interest. Like how do you, like what are some action steps that lead that towards like a career route?
Sure. I think for me, what was really helpful was like relationship building. And I know folks say like networking and it means this like big thing. Like it's not just like going to events, right? It's like I think for me, it was, I've been really intentional about like learning, whether that's like reading, whether that's like going to events, whether that's, being in community spaces, growing my expertise around the issue that it's like important to me. Prior to me joining Planned Parenthood, I was doing like immigration rights advocacy, but it was always around like women's healthcare access, right? It was always around some type of something related to like healthcare and making sure like women or folks who or femmes, what are the issues surrounding that and like figuring out how I can work through that specifically. And there was like obvious intersections with like immigration status issues, language access, all those things. But the core of that and what I was really interested in growing my expertise around was like healthcare access. So really, again, just like in terms of the steps that I took was like meeting with folks who are like running organizations, going to their events, going to their like monthly meetings, figuring out in my like professional capacities how like, I can, siphon almost resources to those groups, really building relationships with elected officials, through my work as an organizer, naturally through the work I was doing in the Senate and in the House of Reps, was able to like partner a lot with elected officials and their staffs. I think it's more important to grow relationships with staff members who are like moving the mechanics, and pushing the work of the elected official. Just like growing those relationships, whether in official capacity, through like work and working on initiatives, and just like going to like events or like happy hours or calling someone for coffee. The relationships that I've been able to build have been very beneficial. And participating in like participating or other growing advocacy campaigns yourself, whether that's on like, there's different avenues to do that, whether that's like some kind of community conversations, events, just making sure that the community more broadly is aware of that there's an issue happening. I think pulling people in to participate in those actions is really helpful. That has been helpful for me, in kind of fine tuning what advocacy means. Yeah, those are some of like the steps. I mean, like obviously like applying for like the relevant jobs, given all the experience you're able to get doing that work, applying for jobs in politics, volunteering on campaigns has been really helpful. Joining coalition groups, and advocating for issues in like in a community capacity. Yeah, those are some like key action items that have been helpful for me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that really speaks to the idea that no one works in a like everyone like
Yeah,
needs like it's all interconnected, like you don't work alone, that sort of thing.
yeah,
And really pointing to like the power of like informational interviews as well. Um, so yeah, no, thank you. That's really awesome. I know like in higher ed, like something that we really love to do is like committee work. And so I like whatever that looks like in other organizations or your employers, finding like that connections there. For sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pivot to the next question that's more focused on government relations. So, what's it like to work in a field that has become more politically charged within, let's say, like the past decade? I know it's sort of been a little bit more closer than that, but I'll expand it to the decade.
Um, yes. I think I guess I can speak for my experience starting at Planned Parenthood and working in government relations to what it has been now. I think you're right. It has been, become politically charged. Folks are reacting often to like moments and sound bites and current events. So I think things have been more reactionary in this field, and that has like translated into my work. I think when I began in the government relations capacity, it was more like long-term strategy building, working with partners in a more intentional way. But now largely folks are responding to like what's happening in the world, responding to movements, responding to um, things happening in the political sphere. And so I think it's definitely been helpful to keep up with like current events. Um, definitely keeping your ear as what's happening on every tier of government. What's happening from the White House, the City Hall, even like town councils, just being like really in tune with what kind of political conversations are happening, but also, as I mentioned at the top, being really in tune with what's happening on on the community level. A lot of like things that are happening, in terms of like politics and how that translates into the work I do in government relations are like conversations happening on the community. There's something that happens to the world, people react on like social media, and it like kind of grows tentacles from there. So really being again in tune to what's happening on the ground and being prepared to react really swiftly. Um, but also being intentional about like long-term strategy. Like these are like moments and blips in time. At the end of the day, there's like real long-term impact. So what I've had to do in the last like 5 years is think long-term and short-term, which I know sounds like broad, but that's really where like the the network comes in. That's really where like community partnership is helpful. Um, yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, yeah, and that actually leads to my follow-up question, and you pointed to it. I really appreciate you kind of bringing up like this reactionary approach to the work, because it's so funny because we all have some form of like reactionary work in our own jobs, and it's like, oh wow, like that's a huge social shift that's impacted by or that's brought on by the impacts of a political sphere. Um, but how has the overturning of Roe versus Wade changed your personal outlook on how you approach work? Not necessarily, or you can answer it in the terms of like the work that you're getting itself too.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, how I've Roe has, I guess I'll start with say Roe was like a fundamental shift, not only for like the reproductive rights and justice movement, but for like all social justice issues. What I think what it really revealed was like we can have like courts, like judges, like make these like lifetime decisions, which that's what they're there for. But no like thing is like really protected, and we need really like long-term community building strategies to, kind of cement some of the rights that we all kind of thought we had. I talk to a lot of people who are like 55 years old or like relatively young who are like, I remember a time before, Roe and what it looked like. And they're still here walking and advocating. They're like, I had to do this, 50 years ago. And why am I doing this again? Like that's like, a reality. And it's not just like abortion rights. We learned like LGBTQ rights for, Black people, rights for women, immigrant communities can all be like gone. Like that's like the reality of what Roe kind of highlighted for us. And so I think for myself, and I think a lot of folks that I work with in the reproductive rights space, is just like how to rethink this movement as like, which, you know, again, sounds like really broad, but how do we like make sure this iteration of the movement, we're like permanently embedding, you know, the rights to not just like abortion rights, but the rights for like women, people of color, LGBTQ folks, because it wasn't just like women who were impacted by this decision in, you know, last year or even more long term. I know we've had like conversations again with folks who have done like civil rights work, what that looks like if, you know, the courts decide to overturn some things, folks doing LGBTQ plus advocacy, disability rights advocacy. You know, I think a lot of folks kind of woke up in that moment, and realized that there's some like long-term planning that we have to do. And I think what's conversations happening now, what folks landed on is that we need to like strengthen our muscle around like political engagement in a real way, and not just like on a federal level. I think that's like kind of a global concern, is like folks are aware of like federal, you know, presidential, Senate, Congress, congressional elections, but what it looks like on a hyper local level, state elections. You know, there's appointment of judges on the federal level, but there, you know, this decision had to go through like circuit courts, and you know, you know, it's like really growing the consciousness of like what the actual political and government process looks like and how that is impacting us um, more broadly. But yeah, I think just being more intentional, making sure this post Roe, that's if we're going to regain some of the rights that we've lost and currently, you know, still being under attack. There's several other lawsuits that impact like reproductive rights that are like being decided now. There's a decision that I'm like kind of waiting on today out of the Supreme Court on medication abortion access. So it's like ever changing, right? Just like how do we make sure that we're bringing all the folks to the table, how we're growing community power, how we are translating community voices and needs into like political action, how we holds like all elected officials accountable for their actions, no matter what side of the aisle you fall on, and how do we make sure that we're like bringing up voices who are impacted up and to the center to really highlight how these types of decisions impact folks in a real way. Yeah, I'll stop there, but I think those are some of the things that come up for me when I think about like post Roe and what my work has looked at.
Yeah, thank you so much for providing that insight. And yeah, to hear that, you know, you're currently waiting on a decision right now, that's something that I don't like, oh, you know, in thinking about how the rest of my workday goes, it's nothing like that sort of thing. But so my last question before we move into an open Q&A is, what advice do you have for someone who is aspiring to be, let's say, in your position, whether they are starting out in the field of government relations or looking to transition into it?
Sure. So I will say in my experience, a lot of folks who I know that have, you know, work in these types of capacity, whether it's for like a lobbying firm or like a nonprofit, um, have like had like everyone has done their, we like to call it like their stint in government, right? Like folks go from city council, they work for a lobbying firm or a nonprofit. I like went from the House of Reps into this position. The folks on my team have all had some like stint in government. So I was strong. I wouldn't say you have to like work in government for like an elected official or, you know, or something like that, but definitely if possible, kind of if you are interested in working like in a city agency or state government agency, federal agency that's focused on an issue that you're interested in. I think that is like definitely the natural route to go from government into the government relations capacity. I know that when you know, when I was looking for this job and these types of positions, one of the first things folks looked at on my resume was like, who did you work for? Or what agency did you work for? Or what's your like policy experience? And so that was like really helpful, but also like research institutions and think tanks doing like the policy work in that capacity. And also, you know, doing direct advocacy, whether it's in the nonprofit space, organizing space, working and mobilizing communities it really translates well in like government relations work. The fact that you're able to like convince and movement builds, I think is like a key skill to have, working in like government relations, where you have to like influence and you know, ask elected officials to do something. Yeah, I think that movement building piece is like really helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. That was all very helpful to hear. So at this time, we're going to be transitioning into an open Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to use your raise hand function. We do encourage you all to turn your cameras on and have your microphones off if you're able to. But we'll start. Go ahead. Amy, go ahead.
Hi, Maryam. Thank you so much. This was incredibly interesting. And I was actually just reading about the decision that we're all waiting for from the Supreme Court today. My question is about kind of the change in some of the partnerships that Planned Parenthood has to make or is thinking about making as they're going into this next generation. The FDA comes to mind, because if a judge who has no medical experience whatsoever is allowed to make a decision that basically says, even though the FDA is filled with doctors and researchers and nurses who know about the safety and the efficacy of this medication, I'm just going to make this unilateral decision in the 5th district that no, they're no good. So I'm a little, I've been around since many permutations of healthcare access and abortion access and birth control access for women. And one of those people who says, I can't believe I'm marching for this again. But this is the first time I've really seen that they're going after the science of it, not just what they believe is the ethics or the legality of it. And I'm interested to know if Planned Parenthood is thinking about kind of partnering with organizations like this.
Yeah, I mean, and I will say that, again, just in like my capacity and how we like partner with national organizations, government agencies. I do work under like the National Planned Parenthood Federation of America. I work for one affiliate, kind of under the broader umbrella of like Planned Parenthood. And they've had, they work really closely with like federal partners, agencies, the White House, folks in Congress on educating elected officials on this issue so that they can speak accurately, speak based in the science, as you mentioned, to make like legal arguments, advocacy arguments, passing legislation. And we work with them on a more local level to kind of do the same, kind of grow the language skills and competencies with electeds, community partners, just so that folks are, as they're talking about these issues to their communities, their constituents, that they're doing so accurately. And in terms of partnerships, for what Planned Parenthood, my affiliate, the national office, has been doing, even before this decision, again, is being really intentional about how a number of issues like intersect in the reproductive rights issues. I mentioned like birth equity earlier, working with like national and local partners who are working on like Black maternal health issues, insurance access and coverage in a more equitable way, funding doula services, being intentional about bringing those partners in and kind of leading those conversations, as opposed to like Planned Parenthood being the face of it,
right,
per se, but kind of bolstering and supporting more local experts on these issues. That is like work that we've been doing, and I think what we hope to expand again as we're like moving to post Roe, whatever happens with this decision this evening.
Post jobs, right?
Yeah, it's it's abortion access, but it's also like, how does this impact marginalized communities? How does it impact like Black and brown people, young people, old people, older adults, rather, making sure that they're experts of their experience, creating like advocacy platforms for them to uplift those stories. And anyway, like if you need to get them in front of the FDA to like translate those stories so that the FDA is like communicating that, in like the legal arguments and the Department of Justice and those like legal arguments they're leading. I think that's like the intentional work Planned Parenthood has been doing, through like our program and
Right.
legal
I know they did
analysis.
a lot of really important work about reducing forced cesarean sections for
Yeah.
Black and brown women who don't have as much access to support and education around that as well. So that's I figured this medication abortion pill is just like the next step in chipping away at the rights that people have been expecting for years.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I sent you a LinkedIn request. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. I'll look at it after this conversation.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you again. This was really interesting.
Thanks, Amy. Valen, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, I sent you one too, so please accept it. But you kind of touched on this throughout your talk when you were saying, because the movement that you support has become so political, there are some challenges there. But what are some other challenges that you have to face? And what skills do you have to address those challenges?
Sorry, you cut out for me a little bit. I didn't hear it, some of the question.
What challenges do you face in your role, and what skills do you find yourself utilizing the most to address those challenges?
I think thank you for that. Definitely misinformation, and having to like, correct folks' like understanding of the issue, whether it's abortion access, reproductive healthcare access. There's a lot of like misinformation that was like intentionally embedded in these like conversations. So kind of dispelling that, making sure folks are like aware and working to like educate folks, are definitely the challenges. And I guess to like address that is like focusing on community education, creating as many tools we can like give to communities so that they are aware and empowered, and can also like talk about the issue like correctly, that's based in science and fact and the individual lived experiences of folks, and uplifting that. There was a second part I think I missed.
I think you kind of touched on it, like what skills do you use to to address those challenges? And it sounds like communication is what it is.
Yeah, like communication, education, definitely is like really helpful in addressing some of those challenges.
Okay. Is it okay if I ask another question, Samantha?
Go ahead.
You talked about, immersing yourself in the advocacy environment and learning about it as much as you could before, changing it into your career move. But was there, like, how did you approach the job search itself? Was there anyone who helped you? What boards did you use? Yeah.
So I think it was a combination of like job search on like the traditional like job boards. I think less so now, but like when I first started, I think in the Senate, I got my job working for a senator, from someone I knew at one of the city's political clubs. So I think that's where like the network came in. I literally went to an event. I talked to someone. I'm like organizing, and they're like, "Oh, this senator has this job open," and it happened to be the senator that represents where I lived at the time. So I think it's kind of informally like speaking to someone, talking to them about my passion, and then the opportunity came up. More so now it's like job boards, definitely like city and state, for folks who are like interested in government, has a really good job board where they regularly update city jobs, like from government jobs, lobbying firms, law firms, on really all tiers of government if you're like interested in a job in government. So yeah, those are like the two kind of like functional things I did when I was like looking for my job.
Thank you, Maryam.
Great, great. So Teresa, before I get to you, I did have a question come through because Anthony unfortunately isn't able to turn on his mic or camera, but he wants to know, did you ever deal with imposter syndrome reflecting back at your time going through the MPA program?
It's so funny because I was talking to my friend about this. I guess like a personal, yes. I think imposter syndrome is like real. And as like a personal like thought or value, I go back and forth between like, is it like imposter syndrome or is it like systemic like bias that is like not allowing me to like thrive in this environment? I think with, you know, the MPA program, really any like professional education space I've been in, I've like experienced both. And when I was going through my, you know, MPA program, thankfully, in terms of like the folks that I was surrounded by, I had like a really diverse like group cohort that I came in with, like my classmates, racially diverse, gender diverse, age diverse. So it's like really comfortable for me to kind of navigate, you know, that space, being around like so many different people and learning from like different cultures. So I did appreciate that, you know, being in the Marxe program. I think that's like unique. I will be like honest about that. But yeah, imposter syndrome is real, as like me as an individual coming from like my background, this like little Black girl from the Bronx. It's like always hard to like, you know, navigate certain spaces and the elitism that comes up in certain spaces. But I also, you know, try to like, you know, have that realization in my mind that there's also like systemic bias issues that show up in spaces that are there and sometimes don't allow folks to like thrive. So I go back and forth between those kind of two schools of thought. But yes, it definitely came up for me. In Marxe, definitely appreciate the diversity of my colleagues and cohort. That made me like definitely more comfortable in my classes and just meeting folks. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, that's a really good like reflection, just like on how we all are connected here and just who our networks actually are. They are very diverse, you know, across gender, race, age, like even that for sure. Teresa, go ahead.
Hi. Um, Thanks so much for your talk. I appreciate hearing from you. As you were talking, I just thought about the complicated history of Planned Parenthood, and there being so many issues about celebrating Margaret Sanger, and then also concerns about her relationship to the eugenics movement in the Black community. And there are many schools of thought that kind of have the opinion that it's that relationship that kind of does not get Black and Brown communities actively behind the role of advocating for reproductive rights, because the right has been able to oftentimes use eugenics and Sanger as a reason for saying that she's anti-Black, to kind of advocate their anti-choice stance. Mm-hmm. What would you know, how is Planned Parenthood trying to, I guess, change their relationship with people of color and ways in which they're trying to be more vocal about how the fight for reproductive rights really is a civil rights issue? That's a long-winded way of saying it, but I hope you get the gist of what I...
Yeah, you know, I think that's like definitely a concern. I know it's you know, I get that question a lot as a Black person. And Planned Parenthood nationally, locally, with the local affiliates. I think we've like approached that concern with recognizing the Sanger legacy, recognizing, you know, her background, her stance, her ideology, and some of the harm that has caused Black and Brown communities, have like publicly been vocal about that history and the concerns that have come up, and have done like a global reckoning over the last few years. Really just saying that, like, we know that's, you know, we know the legacy of our founder. I know, and we know how that's like come up for Black and Brown communities, and how, you know, really working to restore and build trust with Black and Brown communities through partnerships programs. For my affiliate, and this is like not just like the Planned Parenthood PPGNY affiliate, but all affiliates really throughout the country have been thinking about this. For the last few years, my affiliates has done a lot of work to recognize and reckon with that harm. We launched an initiative called Reviving Radical, really again doing just that, recognizing Sanger's legacy, putting on like community education events to talk through the legacy with folks in community, and have like healing spaces so folks from the community can come together, talk about the harm, recognize it, put it on the table, and work collectively to like deal with it, hold Planned Parenthood accountable, to ensure that we were like embedding equity practices, embedding ways to better support Black and Brown communities in our service delivery, in our community programs. The Reviving Radical initiative is a space where we've brought in like practitioners from Black and Brown communities to come in, lead Planned Parenthood's work through this. And it's something that we're doing throughout our affiliate in New York State. Nationally, we have programs specifically for the Black and Brown communities. We have the Stand With Black Women initiative that is working to highlight issues that impact Black women, specifically through program education, ways in which we're retooling our service delivery models. We have a program called the Rise program that works with Latinx communities. There's always more work to be done. And I think that's where, I talked about at the top, Planned Parenthood's intentionality with partnering with folks who are on the ground, are working directly in community, to make sure folks are not only like educated and have access to our services, but like are empowered, helping us learn about what services folks actually need, and making sure that we're responding accordingly. But we always have more work to be done. There always is more work to be done. There's always more conversations to have. There's always more programs. There's always more resources we can provide in the communities. So it's work that's ever changing, ever evolving, but definitely work Planned Parenthood is committed to. But also in the conversations around like Roe, post-obs, centering like the reality of who's most impacted by these decisions, and not only having Planned Parenthood communicate that, but again, creating a platform for folks who are in marginalized communities to, say that themselves. Yeah, that was like long-winded. I hope I like answered the questions, but yeah, that's some of the like reckoning work Planned Parenthood has been committed to nationally and locally, to address some of those like issues that have come up in communities.
Thanks so much. Yes, Teresa wrote in the chat, thank you as well. So thanks so much for that question. Next, I'll call on Marcia.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. If there's noise in the background, I'll put it in the chat. This is fantastic and I'm enjoying it. Can you tell me if it's like a natural progression to go from advocacy into policy? Because sometimes I speak of myself, I think that advocacy is something that I really want to do and be engaged in, but I think that policy is the root of change. Policy is where you're making things happen on a wider, a bigger scale. So can you say that if it's really like a natural thing to flow from advocacy and engagement into policy? Thanks very much.
Yeah, I like to think of like policy and advocacy as being like tied together. So I know like a lot of the advocacy that I like did in you know, not only in my capacity as in government relations, but when I was like doing immigration rights organizing, a lot of it was like community building to like pass a bill, or like, do some research on like drafting bill language, or creating strategy to like meet with the relevant elected officials to kind of address that like issue that myself, or like advocacy campaigns I was working on. Like I think how I've thought about advocacy was like the ultimate goal was to make like systemic change through policy. And so a lot of what I was doing was like policy research, and it wasn't for um it wasn't for like an organization, or like, it was for like me and like my friends who wanted like language access, or Eid celebration in schools, or all the like different issues that were coming up for some of the immigrant communities that I was working in. So there was like this policy always lived naturally in the advocacy work that I was doing. I guess the more like formal transition for me, and I see with a lot of folks that I engage, is like working on advocacy campaigns. It's kind of hard more so now, but like formalizing advocacy coalition groups. Like there's on the national level, there's like Black Mamas Matter Alliance. That's one group that I like to cite a lot. They're like a coalition of Black birth justice organizations that have like a formal nonprofit working on that issue. And it's a bunch of orgs. So kind of like, and they work on like policy and advocacy. So kind of like formalizing it in that way. Working in government, I think, is like the natural, progression, or for like a lobbying firm, where you are still like working on the community side and advocacy side, but kind of more formally drafting legislation and strategies around it, advancing it. Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
You did. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much. Jessica?
Hi, Maryam. Thank you for talking to us today. This has been really insightful. I think touching a little bit on what you were just talking about your work with both policy and advocacy. Now that you're involved more in advocacy and like lobbying type of work, I don't know if you have any thoughts on like whether like behind the scenes kind of policy work, or if direct advocacy with government officials is more fruitful in terms of achieving policy goals. I mean, I assume that kind of the two go hand in hand, but the reason I ask is because I'm also an MPA student, and my concentration is in policy analysis and evaluation. So I'm looking for policy analyst type of roles, but often I'm wondering like whether that path will be impactful, like whether, these briefs will get read, like, that kind of thing. And I just kind of wonder what your thoughts are on that, as, since you work in government relations, and if you found that that is more, actual impactful.
Yes, I think, and if I'm understanding, is it more like, are you asking like, is the policy analysis route more impactful than like the lobbying route?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Or like writing bill, like, yeah, like writing type policy work. Yeah.
I would say the honest answer is both. I think for like policy analysts, it was work that I was doing a little when I was working in Congress, and when I first started at Planned Parenthood. With policy analysts and kind of drafting language and doing that research, what elected officials, their goal around like moving bills is like to have a direct impact in their communities. Like each elected official, they have to like run every 2, 4 years, 6 years, whatever. And their voting record is like centered on like what they're saying publicly, but also like the bills that they're passing. And folks in those communities want to make sure it's reflective of, what the elected official told them when they were running, right? So I think for me, it was, when I was doing that work, it was really helpful to, do the kind of formal research on like current laws, other bills that were like idling or moving through the process, but also like making sure that it was like reflective of what what elected officials are telling their communities. And like one quick example is I was doing some research on a bill around like housing, and my principal was like going around talking about it, like talking about the idea that they wanted to introduce. And we were like talking about it at a community board meeting, and they were like, oh, when you were running, you said this, is that going to be in the bill? And then we had to like actually go make sure it was like reflected in some way. Not, you know, it can't be like exactly, but like, you know, making sure that is there. And I think that like scores points, if you will, when you're going back and you're running again and you're talking to folks about the progress and work that you said you were going to do. I think on the lobbying side, obviously, you know, putting, I don't want to say pressure, but, you know, talking to elected officials as much as possible with the backing of community, or like, you know, depending on like what type of lobbying you're doing, like resources or money, that's like always influential and like swaying an elected's position. But from what I've heard, ultimately, I've had elected officials, you know, when I'm talking about a bill, they'll say like, oh, I had to like talk to my community about it, or, you know, I had to like see what other bills I'm supporting, or, you know, I had to research it a little bit more. So I think they kind of go like hand in hand. I think also, to be honest, like the political movement, the political environment, what's happening in the world, I think is also like a contributing factor. So yeah, I hope that answered the question. I feel like that was like a really broad answer, but yeah, those are some of the examples that I've seen kind of doing both of that work. And now I do some like policy analysis and research when I'm like working on like creating a bill with elected official. And the question always comes up of like, how is it like impacting my district or my community? So yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Great. And I think we have time for one final question. Ebenezer.
Thank you so much, Maryam, for your time. The question I want to ask is, did you have a mentor or someone who helped guide you on your career path? Because I'm curious to know if having a mentor has played a significant role in your career.
I had several. I still talk to someone who does a lot of like immigration advocacy. I met her when I was like 19, and I still like talk to her like regularly about like the work I'm doing now, just like historically what my career path has been. She's not someone who's like worked in a formal capacity in government relations or like anything. She's someone who's like from the community and who's like, this is what the people need, and you need to like figure out how to like do that in a, you know, in the big job that you have, she'll say to me. And so yes, it has been helpful in, you know, guiding me in the steps that I took to grow professionally, just like how to, you know, even how to like advocate for myself and like my professional growth. All right. But also like making sure that's how I'm like strategizing and building a pathway in the advocacy work that I'm doing for passing a bill. I definitely still like talk to her. I definitely have like several folks who are elected officials who are mentors, just seeing their like growth and trajectory, who will like tell me, you know, like, this is the reality of the political moment. This is maybe how you should like talk to folks, or like will sit with me and kind of like strategy builds in my, like, even though they're not necessarily like champions of reproductive health, just like in their experience working as an elected official, it's like been really helpful to talk like pathways of success with them. So yes, definitely helpful. Definitely finding somebody you can trust, finding someone who believes in you, finding someone who is as well connected as possible to the issue or work that you're passionate about is definitely helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful question to sort of as we wrap up this session here. Thank you all for joining us today. If everyone can please join me in thanking Maryam for joining us. Like throw your hand, like throw those clap emojis up, whatever it is, all that stuff. So just before we leave, just a couple of things. So Maryam, I talked to you about this a little bit earlier. What is a resource, whether it's a podcast or a piece of a news article, something that anyone can take from after today? So any like resource that you recommend as like a follow-up action?
Sure. And I was thinking about this question earlier. I don't know if I'm like old school, but I still like read like the like newspaper, like, you know, just like traditional news media, whether it's online or like, so I still get like the paper where it's available. Like, I don't know if Metro still exists, but like those like hyper New York City papers
It
are really
doesn't
helpful.
anymore. Oh
Yeah,
my, I'm
like
so
I know when I like first started, I would like go into the train station and get the newspaper, come upstairs and like read it on the bus. Like, you know, that was just me. I still do that online, just like some cool outlets in terms of the work that I do is like Politico, City and State, Cranes, like regularly update kind of what's like moving and shaking on the local and state local and state levels in terms of like politics and what's happening in government. I listen to podcasts. There's the Brown Girls Guide to Politics. It's more national kind of political translation of what's happening, targeted to like Black and Brown women that I follow pretty regularly. Kind of they talk the way that I talk, so I like that. NPR is really good, kind of the traditional like political outlets. But again, I'm like old school, so it's me, like I still go to community board meetings and I sit there and I listen to like what folks are talking about like approving some like new building or like program, whatever. That's like what is helpful for me when possible, going to like local tenant association meetings, going to like just like events. Whenever I see an organization that I'm like interested in the work, I'll like go to their virtual events. So it's really like me like being in like community with folks and learning and also just like connecting in real time to some like really cool advocates. So yeah, I'm like happy to like connect with folks on LinkedIn to like kind of drill down a little bit on what that looks like in practice or like provide suggestions. But yeah, those are some of the things that come up for me.
Yeah, you came prepared. I was like that was like more than like that was awesome. So yeah, so thank you again for joining us. Thank you everyone for taking this hour to join us with Maryam. We do have our first in-person student and alumni networking night coming up in May 3rd. An email was sent out to everyone about it. If you haven't received it, please let us know. We want to see you there. But thank you again, Maryam. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Great we're at the middle of the week. Charge on through.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.